Let's go live with Jack Kelly. Welcome to the one-of-a-kind LinkedIn live show that will help you with your job search and advancing your career. We will bring in educated career experts who will share their insights and give you inside tips on how to be successful in your job search. Now let's get into today's show with your host, Jack Kelly.
I think it's live. Is that live, Christine?
I haven't gotten the official notification yet.
Okay, it does say on here, meeting is now streaming live.
You're live.
Yes. Okay, we are live for the first out of hopefully many of these compliance series with having top brilliant experts talking about what we feel is going to happen in compliance moving forward. In the compliance, legal, risk, privacy, anti-money laundering, antitrust. And let's just jump right into it. So I'd like to throw out a question first. Big thing, new administration, Biden's in place. He has two choices. He has two picks for the SEC and CFPB. Do you think that his administration, and this is not politics, just based on facts, do you think that this administration is going to be much more regulatory oriented? And if so, is that going to be really good for compliance, legal, risk, audit, AML professionals, which means more jobs and more money? What do you guys think?
Maybe I'll start. It's Eric Young. Yeah. Thank you for having us, and thanks everyone for being here. Short answer is yes, likely more regulation. We've already seen that, particularly compared to the prior administration. Already indicators for greater transparency and an emphasis on safety, whether it's safety for employees, safety for markets, safety for customers, and the climate. And that typically means, if not more rules, more enforcement. So for the compliance industry, that means better have the controls, better be more nimble, better have data and nimbleness to be able to report to the board on how good are we really doing in managing this risk.
So does that mean, Eric, that we already have the regulations in place, but maybe it hasn't lately been enforced as much or overseen as much or paid that much of attention to it? So now there's going to be more attention paid to the activities. So you're going to see a big shift. Is that kind of
some rules have long been in place, depending on whether it's customer protection, antitrust, et cetera, but it's always the degree of enforcement and supervision. And there's different ways to supervise or regulate or audit, but ultimately it boils down to the firm itself and its culture and its people. That thing never changed, culture. And that's part of what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Now, Nick, what do you think? Do you think that it's going to be much more aggressive moving forward?
I'm kind of an optimistic person. And so I kind of view a lot of what he's done, whether it's with respect to these executive orders or sort of the change of sort of the broader culture from the top, or the tone from the top, so to speak. I think that's going to cascade across, organizations, to Eric's point. And I think it's going to create a lot of opportunity for ethics, compliance, for legal, for risk, to add more value to their organization, right? To help them sort of navigate through this undulating floor of risk, or as these new regulations come across, whatever we're traversing across, it's going to give us a lot more opportunities to show, hey, we're adding value here and you kind of need us to help navigate through this. I think the drive behind a lot of the changes are in the direction of things that I think resonate with me. Let's fix the climate. Let's fix, some of the social issues. Let's address some of these things that maybe have gotten, kind of pushed to the wayside, when the old way of doing things, which were, hey, for every regulation you bring in, I'm going to cut 2 or cut 5 or whatever that kind of approach was. Is it an overcorrection? I think we'll see in time, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for folks in our field to kind of step up, kind of grab the bull by the horns, so to speak, and start speaking into their organization to help them navigate, whatever's coming down the pipe.
Dick, that's interesting. So when you say social issues, it's, to be very frank, like I didn't think in terms of compliance, regulatory, et cetera, for social issues, but you do, I guess, right? And that's part of your whole company. Absolutely. And kind of part of your mission, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Well, right? I think it's all one thing, right? Like we can be in different sort of pockets of our organization, but what is ethics and compliance and risk? What are we talking about? Our organizations aren't full of like automatons and robots. if that's the case, then
Yeah,
we just
wait,
need voters.
it's going to happen though.
Well, let's
The
see.
robot
Okay.
part.
Need people.
Perhaps. Yeah, it's probably going to come quicker than I think. But my point is, everything we're doing has a human at the root of it, right? And so the culture of an organization is just the sum total of all those behaviors and all those actions and all those values of those people. What do those kind of average out to? And risk is looking at a certain aspect of the outfall or the production of those behaviors, and compliances as well. So for me, I think it all kind of goes together, especially in this new century we're in. We're in a kind of a knowledge work economy, and these overlays of regulation and these areas that we can really help address in our organizations, they all have people at the base of them. And those people's behaviors and how those people feel in those organizations have a direct correlation with how well those organizations behave, and what the sum total of that company's ethical behavior in the marketplace is. So to me, it all comes down to that, because look, we've seen over the last year, Irina used this term, which I hadn't really heard of before. We've been talking about work from home, and she was saying, it's work really from everywhere, or work from anywhere. And so what we've seen is that wall between our work life and our home life, and this old sort of adage of like work-life balance, that's gone. So if anything, it's work-life harmony. If anything, this veil has been pierced and it's been dissolved, and it becomes more and more important, again, particularly in the knowledge work economy, where we are our work. We're not just standing by, we're not like, Lucille Ball just stuffing, chocolates into a box. Right? We're putting ourselves into our work, and we're using our brains, and we're using our mind, and we're using our heart to solve problems in whatever sort of area of the world that we work in. So recognizing, I think, from people who are in risk or who are in compliance or whatever, recognizing that this is really the name of the game right now, to your question, Jack, I think adds a lot of validity to the integration of these social issues in the context of how we manage risk and how we ultimately crowdsource risk. That's
interesting. That's interesting, Nick. And I know Biden is definitely interested in race equality, taking care of economic wealth inequality. And Irina, what do you feel about his picks, Gensler and the other gentleman for the CFPB? Do you think those people are going to be, very aggressive? Do you think they're going to keep the status quo? What's your thoughts?
I mean, I think in the current environment, just to go back to one thing and then I'll answer your question. I think you asked, Eric and Nick, how does this fare for the compliance officers? And I think this becomes a continued path for the question of our compliance officers. Do they have enough stature within the organization? Are they able to move the needle? Are they able to escalate where there are issues that are bubbling up? So that's maybe one point. Second point I'd say is, even in the last 6 to 9 months, we've seen some willingness, certainly, for enforcement of existing regulations, even without any new ones. And so I think, to me, it's a double down for compliance of everything that is on the books right now. And then there's some new things that are going to come up. So some of the agency choices, sometimes we often say that people reflect policy. And so we certainly see and anticipate the heads of the agencies to make their mark, certainly on a number of net new topics, right? And I think that's the exciting thing for compliance, is you've got some areas like IT and digital innovation that could come under looking at not only, maybe not regulations, but it could be sound practices. We can talk about those later. Certainly a double down on consumer protection for all the things that Nick was talking about. And then we've got this effervescent, sort of new emerging.
Wait, can I ask you, Irina, if I could ask you, so with the consumer, which goes into CFPB, and the gentleman says what? Robin, I'm spacing out on it because I'm an idiot. What's
Chopra.
What do you think is going to happen with that agency with him in charge?
I think the anticipation for CFPB is, again, if we look at the platform, TIDE is around consumer protection. And so certainly already existing supervisory practices of examinations, the priorities, more frequent exams, more information requests, all of those things could certainly come into play. Heightened focus on complaints and then certainly the eventual, enforcement action. So, I mean, again, I think that along the traditional paradigm of what a regulatory agency does, certainly as they start to look at more and more of this data, and I do think it's going to become data rich.
And I anticipate, sorry, Irina, these agencies, whether SEC, CFPB, and others, particularly that are socially oriented, let's call it, and one could argue SEC and CFPB certainly will be not only empowered, but their budgets will grow. So there'll be a reallocation and growth in their budgets, whether on the enforcement side, policymaking side. And then to Nick's point earlier around people and culture, and Jack, your question around social issues, our leaders within firms are the next generation. And that social issues are important to our next generation. And therefore, today's generation are catching up. The question is, will they be able to keep up, not only in terms of words, but also in terms of investment to be armed, including people's skill sets, not just to be socially responsible, but to be able to demonstrate that a firm is socially responsible. So there's a lot of moving parts, and I think with the Biden administration, it's all coming together to a head.
And do you think Gensler is going to be more geared to those causes, or old school, hey,
it's both.
Let's make sure, okay, a little bit of both?
It's more transparency, greater disclosure, more, greater internal controls. Those are long time expectations, but for the future to demonstrate that these rules will meet social expectations. So I think the pressure will come from the public for these agencies and the administration, regardless of which political spectrum, but that markets are fair, customers are protected. It's the same pillars, if you will.
It's interesting. In full disclosure, selfishly, as someone who has been recruiting compliance, legal risk, audit, those kind of folks for the last 20 plus years, I want to have a lot of scandals. And I want to have a tough regulatory body, because then they go after them. And it's awesome, because that creates a lot of jobs, a lot of opportunities for compliance people. Because if there are not a lot of scandals, a lot of issues, it gets boring. And also, I'm a contributor, senior contributor forum, so it's fun to write about this kind of stuff. So I have my own agenda. I'm hoping that you're going to have crazy stuff happen, and then you're going to have Gensler, who's going to come in there and put in new rules and regulations, enforce the other ones. So you have all sorts of, and this sounds terrible, but I also not going to admit it. I'm not going to pretend. So you have all these fines, you have all these, actions against these places, and it makes you hire more people. And that's kind of a good thing. We need that in this environment. And for the last few years, it hasn't been that great in terms of job opportunities.
Yeah, just one thing I would say, the way I look at it is it's a double down already on what's existing. I think to Eric's point, some of these tenets are longstanding. We're not, they're not changing. Customer protection, fair market access, all of those things are kind of central tenets to financial services. But then we now have like this new flavor and this new layer. So it's almost in my mind is you have to be good on the basics, because there are new things that are coming. Yes. Like I said, either because of digital innovation, climate, consumer enforcement. Media. And so exactly. So, I think there's all these new paradigms that are going to now come screeching into place as well. So you better have your basics down, because it's only going to get harder.
Well,
those
perfect.
Basics are just table stakes at this point, to your point.
Well, because that leads right into the next thing. This is perfect. So, yeah, Nick, do you go on Reddit a lot or no? Or am I just being stereotyping?
Oh, yeah.
Younger guys, so you're on there.
No, I've been on that Wall Street Bets for years and years.
How awesome is that site, by the way?
Reddit. It's an insane sub for sure. And it's like, it's up to like last night, it was at 3.5 million people are subs to it. Like,
do you want to explain to people who are familiar what it's about? Did you want to explain to people who may not know what Wall Street Bets is and and I presume you're familiar with this whole battle between the Reddit day traders and the Robinhood day traders and these hedge funds who've been shorting these stocks? Maybe you can
it's a kind of an interesting thing. It's kind of the populace against the haves. You know what I'm saying? So, I'm sure everybody knows what Reddit is. It's organized into all these different subreddits that are on different interests for this or that, and anything you can possibly think of. This one, Wall Street Bets, is this group of people who post their trades and post what they're going after and so forth. And they've really started to move in mass to protect some businesses that they like, right? So GameStop is one of them, and GameStop is, I don't know what the numbers are. It was definitely below 100 a week or so ago. And yesterday morning, it broke, 385.
But now they're not letting you trade. Robinhood is not letting you trade. And this goes to what you were saying, Irina. All of a sudden, you get this new thing that you're like, what? Eric, have you ever saw that where you have this battle, as Nick was saying? And Nick, I jumped in. It's my fault.
No,
I just
fine,
jumped into everything. As we're talking, maybe you guys could tell who you are, what you do, so they know your awesome background. So you guys know, they'll know what you're talking about. So Eric, and Irina, have you ever thought in a million years that you'd be having a conversation about, day trading people from Reddit who are battling these short sellers, and up until this morning, we're just ripping the faces off of these hedge fund guys, so much so that two big hedge funds, Steve Cohen's hedge fund and Citadel, had to bail out Melvin Capital to keep them from being overtaken by these young millennials and Gen Zs.
With big dollars. I mean, these were big
billions, 2.5 billion or so. They had to get bailed out. Eric, what do you think? Because this is a different world for all of us.
I think it's a new flavor of the day, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the interesting thing for compliance and those of us that practice in this space, so my personal background, I'm with Deloitte. I've been there for 20 years. I focus on governance, regulatory compliance, all those things. Eric and I have some previous history, and we were both former regulators. And so, I think, to me, I look at all the events of the day. This is just in the modern era, right? I mean, because of fast pace of trading, fast pace of types of institutions, who's entering this space. And I think the way I look at it is I strap myself in every day and figure out what other triangulation is going to happen. But I've been doing that for 25 or more years.
So after 25 years, you're like, I've seen it. This is, whatever, I'll figure it out, right? You get used to it. Okay, I got you. Eric, how about you? Does this blow your mind? This is crazy, or same thing? All right, after 25 years, this is just another thing.
I'm the CEO of Reddit, so just no, I've been in the compliance space for a long time. I would say.
Wait, you're being modest. You were the CCO of BNP. You were at GE, at really top tier executive level roles for a long time.
Yes, and
I should have said long, like you're old, but
it's okay. My last name is Young, so I'll always.
There you go.
We'll be forever young.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is we have seen a lot of these movies before, including some of the people, but most importantly, I think Nick put it well. It's a populism that is now fighting back. It's a reflection of the times. And the other interesting irony is if you look at hedge funds and these major firms, a lot of it is electronic trading. It's all computerized, and most likely through Reddit, day traders, et cetera, these are actual people making decisions. Maybe in a coordinated way, I'm sure through social media. It'll be interesting to do a postmortem as to what rules have been followed or not to each of these different players. But these are the new paradigms that we're seeing. And the question then, going back to the compass of the compliance officer skills, is can they react? Can they anticipate? And do they have the skill sets as opposed to just knowing the law or building process? It's actual thinking ahead for these types of scenarios and keeping management and the board ready, or Reddit, no pun intended.
But what do you do when, so I'm going through Twitter and you see things like the SEC is saying, hey, we're looking into it, but it doesn't seem like they know what to do. And to your point, what I see on Wall Street Bets, and Nick, tell me if this is what you see too. I don't want to accuse anybody or say anything out of turn, but it seems like there's, let's use a hypothetical. So, I'm not kind of throwing anyone on the bus. It'd be like, hey, I love ABC Widget Company, and let's go. We're going to go to the moon. And then you put a whole bunch of rocket ship emojis. And I'm not making this up. Lots of rocket ship emojis. This is going to 1,000. This is great. Let's do it. And then you have, as Nick mentioned, like 3 million people on just that one subreddit who are all banding together to say, let's get ABC Widget Company to the moon.
Listen, we didn't hear SEC complaining when Jim Cramer is throwing things at, talking about the bull, or you get a guy on CNBC who's running a hedge fund talking about his positions. He had a massive platform for this.
Yeah.
There's been a massive democratization of trading ability. You have apps on your phones. Half of these people probably have never sat at a Bloomberg, probably way more than half. They've never seen a Bloomberg terminal. They may have never even traded on a desktop before. They're only trading on their phone. But let me tell you what's going on in here. And if no one's been to this Wall Street Bets, just go look at some of the recent posts. I just want to read 3 of them to you. Poor as dirt, $40 in my account after paying rent. You boys are helping me put food on the table this week. Here's another one. Now I can write my mom a check and put my sister through Lyme treatment. This has been a very rough year, but I'm so thankful for every single one of you. One more. Thank you all. My wife was diagnosed with MS recently, and my bank account had negative 1,400 in it. These people are making money together. Listen, if this is a free market, they should be able to do what they want. It's not one guy.
But don't you feel bad, Nick, that the more money they make, then these hedge fund guys aren't going to have that Hampton house?
Yeah. They're going to have to, the kids are going to have to go to a state school instead of Dartmouth.
Right? I mean, come on. It's not fair.
Yeah, you're right.
But it's
right.
Lyme disease. Come on.
Think of the other side of
Hampton house. Please.
Now, it's a double-edged sword because they may be really happy today, but what are they going to say tomorrow, because they're relying on this information on Reddit? And then where do you draw that line as to advice, fiduciary responsibility, best interest? And this is where the SEC, the CFPB, and other protection type agencies really are going to and should look carefully as to what's really going on. And going back to compliance, are they thinking along the same way? And do they have the tools, including monitoring, testing, and reporting, to keep pace or ahead of the game?
I mean, to that point, like, it's almost like the stock market is a derivative of the options market. Like, most of these people trading, they don't understand implied volatility. They don't understand the Greeks and things like that. So are they degenerate gamblers, as some folks on the other side want to call them? Maybe or maybe not, but it's not like hedge funds don't make wild bets and blow up from time to time.
All the time. Yeah. Quite often.
So I don't know. It's, you know what it is? It's like a leveling of the playing field in a really interesting way. And to your point, like, we don't know the implications of this yet. And we also don't know, sorry to nerd out on this, but like, as I was kind of saying earlier, shorting is a mechanism of price discovery in a market. It is a mechanism to allow us, in a clean, sort of unfettered market, arrive at the sort of quote unquote proper price, right? So what are the implications if individuals are now scared to short individual names? What does that mean? So is this the beginning of the end, or is this the beginning of or is this the start of a new beginning? I don't know, but there's a ton of really interesting implications that we'll see kind of sprout out of this.
But you think about it, but then you have the other side of the coin, where Robinhood, it seems, I don't know this for sure, but it seems when I was checking this morning and looking at the news, that they weren't processing trades for GME, GameStop symbol, and others. Now follow this. Citadel, gets all the order flow from Robinhood.
Right.
And Citadel was part of Point72, which was the old SAC Capital, Steve Cohen's firm. They gave money to Melvin Capital to keep them afloat. So then you got to say, wait a minute, are they putting pressure on Robinhood not to take these trades because it's going against their interest, because they're propping up, allegedly, I'm saying this is what Nick told me.
Who knows?
This is not my saying it at all. He's IMing me this stuff. So don't come after me.
No, but it's a matter of pulling on that string.
Hypothetically, while this happening, like, I know, Irina, you're saying, hey, it's only something new. This is kind of weird stuff, right? This is very,
it's
like a big tangled knot.
Yeah, not necessarily that it's not new. It's just that it's now accelerated for the current environment, right?
Yeah.
You have more electronic trading. You have, so my only point is, because of the pace of technology, because of the pace of knowledge of individuals wanting to get more in the market, all of those things are just different factors. 20 years ago, they were different factors. So what I'm saying is, all these are playing out just in the current environment, right? So, so the challenge is going to be, how do you keep pace, right? So I'll speak for myself, Eric. For those, that have more than 25, 30 years of experience, I'm a bit jaded, right? I'm seeing here and looking at the current dynamics, and I keep going back to, it's not just about trading for trading's sake. Do you understand the fundamentals? Do you understand the fundamentals of the value, of those companies? So again, I still have this kind of core basic concepts and sort of consumer protection, market access, but just, even I'm, trying to grapple with the pace at which, the news is coming out, how you distill as a compliance officer, what the implications are, for your own firm. Do you have exposure? What are your traders doing? How are you monitoring and supervising? So,
and they even
fundamental analysis has been out for years at this point, right? Like, I mean, I've seen so many articles of guys just saying, well, it's just all up. So just follow the Fed, and then that's the answer. Because, I mean, you can't justify many of these prices with straight fundamental analysis. And I think it may be 10 years. It's at least 8, Well,
that's a great point, because it's almost like the Fed printing all this money. That's kind of pumping up the whole stock market. Let's be honest. If they didn't stimulate the economy with trillions of dollars, the market wouldn't be where it is. So, like, we
just chart the Fed balance sheet with S&P. You know what I'm saying?
Where do you draw the line with all this? It's really weird. This is where I think I may disagree with you, Rita. I think we're getting into a different world now, and I don't know how we pull back from it, because if Powell shuts off, the spigot, everything will fall apart like a house of cards. And
well, I mean, imagine if you could go in a time machine and you went back to the 70s or the mid 80s and you told the Fed, hey, I'm from the future. Guess what the Fed is doing? They'd throw you out of there. They'd call you a lunatic. They said that you're a liar. So obviously the mandate has changed a ton over the last decade, at least. You know what I'm saying? To your point, Jack.
Can I go back to Robinhood and Citadel and some of these other firms?
Absolutely.
One, no commissions. And they've been dinged by regulators already in terms of transparency and disclosure. And I think this is going to come out even more. Second, what is the relationship between Robinhood and some of these other firms? And if they're getting client orders, so to speak, in terms of trades that the populace want to trade, who's benefiting and who's actually making money? And then going back to Robinhood, is there some type of connection? These are the types of things I think regulators need to kind of pull on that thread, using this as a case study, and the case hasn't ended yet. It's only begun, as Nick has said. And is compliance, risk, audit even part of the conversation of everything going on, or our management and businesses reacting understandably in this nanosecond world? And that's, again, because this podcast is about compliance and people, is where do they fit in? How do they fit in?
Right.
So a lot of questions.
Absolutely. Eric, it is interesting that they halted. And I wonder how much of that is due to folks saying, well, don't use my my long shares, don't make those available for shorting. I wonder how much of that played into it, or how much is it coming from this other pressure or whatever. It's just, a lot of it will probably come out in time, to your point, Eric, and we're still kind of sorting through it, but it's sure interesting to watch.
See, this is what's exciting. This is what I'm super excited about all this, because I think this is just going to be the beginning, because this always happens. Think about it. You guys have been doing this a long time. It's very rare that, one company does and that's it. You know what? You see one company does it and you realize everyone else is doing it. And then you realize, oh my God, there's even more to it. So speaking of that, Eric, what is your take? What other kind of issues and things do you think of that keep you up at night, that you think should be brought to the table that people don't know about, or that you're concerned?
I sleep pretty well these days. Having a good time. But
that's what happens when you don't have the pressures of being a CCO, right? You can sleep, relax.
But, I feel for the compliance industry, because the pressure is only going to grow. And that's why there needs to be change. And I'm not going to get into what why, but it certainly needs to be a change, and it goes back to skills, technology, and being part of the dialogue. So fundamentals and risk, audit, compliance, they're all part of the defense of a winning team, and you need defense. And under prior administrations, the focus was on offense and rightly about jobs, but you still need that steering wheel. You still need those brakes on that car and the dashboard. So I'm not highlighting or predicting any surprises. I'm underscoring fundamentals. I would say that's my takeaway.
Do you think that because, and when I'm saying this, it's not politics, it's just kind of analyzing and looking at the facts, because I'm neither a Democrat or Republican, so I don't have a side, I don't have a horse in that race, is that maybe because it was the goal was just moving everything forward, and that regulations were impediment to growth and creating jobs. But then when time goes on and Gensler comes in and other regulators in senior capacities kind of look and say, here's what's lurking underneath. Oh my gosh. Do you think we'll find things like that? Like all these hidden problems that you didn't, that were just kind of, brushed over, but now you have to deal with it. What do you guys think? Is that something that could come up?
I mean, I think also that the current dynamics could expose more, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some of those underlying issues, certainly could definitely be lurking, right? Particularly for, those firms that didn't invest in, certain types of technologies that are relevant for their businesses, right? So I think the problems could be lurking, but the question really is the current environment, because of acceleration of electronic trading, working from anywhere, and that's what I meant by this is sort of this, different story, but those stories always unfold in times of market turbulence, market volatility. In our case, it's been exactly when things go bad is where the problems start to, come unglued, right? So I think the factors themselves, in my view, are opening up sort of the kinks in the system, right? What are the gaps? So the vulnerabilities that are already out there are going to be further exposed potentially in the current environment, right? Just because your factors have changed. And I think that is really, so that's only one element. So I'm not saying that there isn't going to be more attention and more focus on it. The more things that go wrong, the more, there's always the lessons learned analysis that follows that. But I do think that the current factors are also going to contribute. Whatever gaps already existed, they're going to get exacerbated in the near term.
Great point. And I mean, I think to kind of echo that or dovetail off of it, who knows how much sort of like latent gunpowder or latent like sort of explosive material is sort of in the system now that is going to be ignited as we start kind of digging and start, things kind of start popping up. We don't know how drastic of a swing this is going to be and what the sort of damage, because it's always such a lagging indicator, right? Like when the risk blows up, it's not like the risk just happened. It happened a long time ago, or the conditions for that risk to sort of perpetuate were in place for a long time. And then it's like, now we got to kind of play catch up and start fixing it, which goes back to Irina's point about like, if anyone's just been playing like lip service to compliance or lip service to risk and not gotten those freaking basics in place, those table stakes in place, then I'm just saying we're going to see a massive separation over the next 10 years. And it's probably going to be, it's probably going to start big time over the next, 3 years or something, because it's good because the temperature change is so drastic. You know what I mean?
And there's going to be other competing variables. One is in this environment of cost cutting, because there still will be pressure to cut costs. There'll be more mergers and acquisitions, consolidation. And when you have M&A, you're going to have change in organizational structure. And that's either good or bad, depending on the culture at the top, the surviving firm at the top, as to do we retool or do we just home grow what we already have and replicate it into the acquired or merged entity, which is usually not a good idea. And just so much more focus on the risk behind M&A. So all of this, I think, is coming to a head with the new administration, and it's just, that's a whole nother session to talk about, is antitrust and M&A and the compliance risks behind it.
Well, yeah, those are things we'll talk about. What do you think in terms of, when you have Amazon, Google, Facebook, where they just have almost looks like near monopolies? Do you think this new administration that's kind of got a lot of money for them in the campaign would start to look and say, wait, this, after a while, let's take a place like Facebook. If they either could crush the competition or buy out the competition, is that fair? Do you think they're going to tackle that in this, in this administration, or just let it keep going?
Maybe start,
not to put you on the spot with that.
No, well, I think it is going to come to it. I was going to leverage off of something that Eric said is, to me, it's not only about the traditional M&A, certainly bank to bank, broker dealer to broker dealer, bank buying broker dealer, anything like that. But I think it's also, I call it like the expanding ecosystems, right? And the alliances, right? So whether lots and many, many more service providers, you've got big tech, right? And so I think that is definitely going to come into play. I think there's already been, kind of conversations about what the role of the Financial Stability Oversight Council is going to be, FSOC, in this kind of new administration, and whether or not kind of systemic issues. Back in the day, it was the financial market utilities. Now it's entering the picture in terms of big tech. So I think that how they play a role in part of that ecosystem within the financial sector. It could be small players, small fintechs, or all the way up to the big techs. So my prediction is that's definitely going to come into play. And look, there's been some recent, issuances that already start to look at the service providers, so when at the federal level, right, when they issued the sound practices for cloud computing, there's notation there that it also, there's some earmarking for service providers, let's say. So you already start to see, in my view, some of that shift. I promise, Jack, we're not going to talk about specific regs, but there are a couple of examples that are out there. I know. There are also some, so I'll just say generically, there's some examples that are out there that are already treading into kind of that ecosystem space that includes the big techs.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great point. And I think kind of to echo it, or to kind of tangentially talk about this thing that nobody seems to be talking about right now, is like, I don't know if anyone's talking about the M&A market and what multiples are looking like. Like, nominal multiples are extremely high. And usually, historically, those were applied to EBITDA or something like that. These are nominally higher numbers that are being applied to revenue now. So how are these being financed? The banks aren't taking on, 8, 10, 12 turns of EBITDA to finance something that's trading at 8 times revenue. So who's backstopping that, right? There's more equity coming into these deals. If there's a correction or if things move, we're laying some, kind of back to Irina's point from before, we're laying some groundwork for some like potential massive moral hazard when guys are like, how am I going to raise my next fund? Because I put so much money into this thing and I'm never going to get a return from it. You know what I'm saying? Look, if multiples continue to expand, and then, 2 years from now, we're talking about companies trading for 20 times revenue, and then after that, it's 25 times revenue, then great. Then the bubble can sort of keep growing. But I'm just saying, just do the math on it. Like, back to the fundamental analysis question, do the math and, do a DCF analysis on it and see what is it actually going to take from a growth perspective in order to make this investment hit your hurdle rate for your fund. Meaning, how are you going to generate that? At what point do the circumstances that you've created on the onset of your investment begin to influence the behaviors in your organization or in the organization in your portfolio to achieve that return? I mean,
and how will firms get there, and will they stay on the straight and narrow?
Exactly.
So to speak?
Exactly.
So, Eric, do you think you can end up having less, let's say within Wall Street, that you might see more M&A among big banks? And you think that's...
Yes, I think some firms need to be absorbed without naming names. I think some are habitually needing help in some form or another, self-help or regulatory. And the environment is prime for that. There continues to be consolidation. And to Irina's and Nick's points, there are new players. So the banks need to do something to survive and stay ahead of these new players. And these new players, unlike the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s, I think are here to stay because big tech and other firms are bigger than the big banks, more powerful than the big banks. They provide services for the big banks, and they hold information for the big banks. So they've got a ton of leverage. And to your earlier question, it is bipartisan, I think, in terms of the view of big banks. And the pendulum swings, but I think whether it be privacy or information control, it impacts everyone. And so it'll be interesting to see just all these dynamics. You've got big tech, big banks, and everything and everyone in between, and a surge of populism. That means more risk at the end of the day.
And you know, again, back to that paper of yours, Eric, that I love, like this blurring of the line. I mean, there's just blurring of the lines everywhere, right? There's this sort of merging of stuff everywhere, merging of functions and so forth. And, you know, a lot of what you talked about in it was kind of, are these tech companies, are they banks? What are they, right? Are they turning into financial institutions? Like, is that laying the seeds for what this monstrosity can grow into? And what does that world look like? I mean, there's so much uncertainty.
Absolutely.
It's kind of interesting.
Do you think in another sector, the other day, Biden signed an executive order for clean energy. They revoked the Keystone, whatever pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you're going to see more regulation and oversight and rules dealing with the environment, protecting the environment? And then as they're trying to have solar energy, wind energy, clean energy, try to have controls around them. Do you see that kind of an emerging area in terms of jobs generally, but then specifically for compliance, legal risk, regulatory people who are in this space to make sure that, you know, the climate is taken care of? Have you ever, because I don't know much about that area at all. Have you guys ever given it much thought? Or
I think it'll be emerging, right? I mean, again, not to get too technical, but, you know, just like on the digital side, there's, you know, some, you know, proposed rules that talk about kind of computer incident notification. So that gets into the world of regulation. It's not just a good practice from an IT side. So we saw it after the crisis. You know, we saw a whole slew of prudential regulations around risk management that used to live and breathe in the world of guidance and sound practices. That moved into regulation. I think we see some movement on IT kind of moving into the space of regulation. If I were, am I going to be around another, you know, 5, 10, 15 years in compliance and around the hoop? I don't know. But my prediction is there are going to be regulations and practices that start to come into fold, right? It all starts of they're mobilizing, getting data. But if it moves into kind of that regulation space or even practices, I think compliance is definitely going to have a seat at the table. I was part of a roundtable that talked about, but what is compliance's role in the world of operational resiliency? They have a key role. And so all these things start to take on, particularly if there's concerns on consumer protection, if there's concerns about market access, all these things, you know, start to come into play, at least in my view. So my prediction is probably some of it will unfold.
Agreed. And again, a lot of these laws have been around. EPA, OSHA, administrations come and go, but some laws never change. It's always the degree of supervision and enforcement.
Right.
And so if anything, the economic and budget pie will grow, but then it's got to shrink at some point. And that's when the rubber meets the road as to how and where do you divide that budget allocation, more for EPA, more for FCC, less for other areas. That's what compliance and where compliance should be anticipating for the firm, where controls need to be strengthened. It boils down to risk assessment.
Now, Nick, you look at it, your company does something a little different, let's say, than Eric being at GE or an Oppenheimer or BNP. You offer a suite of services that maybe you could talk a little about and to see where you see those areas going. Because there's more like, I would say, what, looking after your employees. Is that fair?
So, our whole purpose is to try to make the world a better workplace. So we have a suite of sort of corporate integrity products that allow organizations who care about this stuff to reinforce their culture, to help them crowdsource risk management, which is something we talk about a lot, and really ultimately reinforce their bottom line. So, I mean, my general view of all of this is that, we take this view of our bodies, for example. That's a very complex thing. We understand that, hey, if I'm on a diet, I'm trying to lose some weight, I don't have to point back to the salad I had 2 weeks ago and say, aha, this pound I lost was due to that salad investment I made, right? That's a very stupid way to look at our lives. And yet when we step into a business, we like shed all of our brain power, we shed our common sense, we shed this sort of complex thinking that we apply in all these other areas of our life. And then, compliance folks are battling for budget to try to make an investment. Okay, look, let's just do some quick math. What's the average revenue per head in across the country? A couple of years ago, I saw it at 250. Let's say it's $100,000, right? Let's say the average sort of margin is 15 to 20%. Okay, so we're talking about 15 grand. You're making profit on each employee is generating that much for their organization. If you can't spend a couple of bucks, you can't spend 10, 15, 20 bucks to reinforce your culture or give them the guidance they need in a safety perspective or in a regulatory perspective or in a trade perspective or how to not take bribes, these things that ultimately make up your organization, again, in a knowledge work economy, not when we're all standing across a machine, a manufacturing line. If you can't spend that money and recognize that I'm going to get higher engagement, I'm going to get lower employee turnover, I'm going to have more people activated. We're all, like I always say, everyone's walking around with a 3-pound nuclear reactor between their ears. You think that's a better risk manager than, an Internet of Things thing that you place on somebody's terminal? It's way better. Of course, it's way better. We have to activate those people, and we can spend a couple of bucks, and you can have a couple of salads, and you can go for walks for a couple of days. And guess what? In a couple of months, you're going to lose whatever weight that you want. So that complex thinking needs to start ascending up to higher parts in the organization, so that we're not arguing for nickels. I mean, these are pennies we're talking about in the context of a broader organizational purpose. So we're trying to help folks kind of see that kind of stuff and put some tools in place that we can point to an ROI, so that the light bulbs are going to come on at the top, either when the generation that's there now starts to say, oh my gosh, this matters to these people. Millennials are the largest portion of the workforce right now. Our value system is different. Our God is not money. Gen Z is probably even further down that road. So there's an opportunity for organizations and for leaders to recognize this and to start feeding into it. There's so much good that comes from it. And just because you can't, but a business is not a simple machine, right? A pulley where, I pull this rope and then this bucket comes up. That's a very simple thing. That's not what an organization is. Humans are complex. Organization of people stacked in different processes and all that other stuff. So bringing a little bit of that complex thinking that we, again, use to govern other aspects of our lives into our business is not only common sense, it's good business. And I think the companies, the leaders who get that and can feed into their people now are going to totally separate from the rest of the pack who are still using those, 1900 style hierarchical, sort of almost militant approaches to running their business.
It's interesting. It's interesting. Irina, Eric, I wonder if you feel the same way I do. And I have 2 Gen Z kids. It definitely feels like the millennials and Gen Zs have a different perspective than Gen Xers and boomers, right? Is that, what do you guys think?
Well, being a Gen Z, I can say.
You're the upper end of the Gen Z, right?
I can say the following. One, metrics are important. So it's a matter of how we use our tools. And there's 2 paths firms can take. One is empowering the people by today's leadership and through pulse surveys or otherwise. It's a positive direction because people will feel empowered. The culture will actually coalesce into something more powerful, particularly in the direction of social change. And we haven't even talked about governance yet.
Right.
Conversely, if employees feel that they're still not empowered, or worse, technology is taking over. The other key metric to look at are whistleblower complaints, customer complaints, and there's a correlation between the two. That's a bad trend. So the question is, who's looking at these metrics closely? Root cause, are the right people looking at it, the board, et cetera. So that's why metrics are important, but are the right people looking at it, or the right people being empowered?
Yeah, maybe two things from my perspective. I mean, I truly believe, and this is Irina's view, that those institutions that can harness that multi-generational aspect are going to be the winners, right? So we're always going to have a mix of generations. Now you have more information coupled on top of it. And I think just practically speaking, from a compliance perspective, I look at the concept of, sort of issue management. Eric mentioned whistleblower, cases, customer complaints. But now the big thing is, how does an organization, no matter how big you are or how small you are, can you self-identify issues, and who really is looking at it and building that culture of self-improvement, right? And that self-improvement could be across a control topic, it could be across a cultural aspect, it could be across anything. And I think that, to me, that's going to be the differentiator, because under issue management systems, anybody can contribute. All employees, can whistleblow and provide, complaints into an organization's hotline. So it's generation agnostic. As long as you have these tools and are able to actually harness it and do something with it, that's the hard part.
Exactly.
And I think part of it is not just getting the data, but also having the right context, and also being able to triangulate,
right, to
look for like the full shape of the thing that you're looking at, because sometimes it's not a square, it's actually a cube, right?
Exactly.
So if you're like, oh, well, we have a lot of, we don't, I deal with this all the time. We don't have a lot of reports. Everything's good. Well, that could be good or bad. It could be good if everyone's willing to speak up, and at the core, people are open and they feel psychologically safe enough to say, and there's actually nothing wrong going on in the organization. Odds are it's not that. Odds are you need to look at that in conjunction with,
definitely,
what's my anonymity rate, or what's the, what are, a couple of other, am I able to substantiate these things? Where are these things located? Because I think, look, we have so much more data right now. We need to sort of step up our way of interpreting this data and turning it into actual information, not just swimming in these data lakes. You know what I'm saying?
And action.
Exactly. Definitely. Sustainable action, right? To actually fix something. Like the worst thing you can do if you have a bunch of weeds in your yard is just mow the grass and think, okay, this is done, right? Those are going to come up faster. You know what I'm saying? You got to weed the garden.
So
a great analogy.
But it's hard to believe we're almost at an hour. It went. I mentioned to you, like in the emails, these things fly. It's hard to recognize. So if you don't mind, for the people who are watching it now, and for those who will be watching it later, projecting out another 3-6 months with respect to people's careers, you always want to feel, hey, where is it going? And how can I align myself, with a fast moving area that could help propel my career? Do you have any thoughts about, hey, if I'm, I want to give someone advice where they're feeling, hey, I'm kind of happy where I am, but maybe I could be happier and have a greater growth trajectory. Do you guys have any thoughts about where to point people to?
I would say you got to do something new. You got to start doing something new. If you keep doing the compliance 1.0 or the compliance 2.0 thing of like, I'm just so busy, I got a massive to-do list, I got to keep my head down, and I got to get this policy out. Obviously, the policies are important. Obviously, these things are important, but we need to do something else to start to really elevate our functions so that we can help turn those light bulbs on at the top to say.
So that could be unlimited. That could be where you are or moving, right? It sounds like you could do that at the company you're with.
For another organization that maybe has an ethos that maybe overlaps more with yours, or has a better mind toward compliance. Or if it's where you're at, change your world, be the change you want to see in the world, and start reaching out to, like my friend Ron says, start reaching out to HR, start reaching out to finance, start reaching out to strategy, and build a little, Three Musketeers plus D'Artagnan, and you guys as cost centers can start to show that, man, if we work together, we can really start to change things and ascend to the adults table where, the profit centers or the offensive team, sits and discusses things.
my point would be, Jack, is, you know, if you're a hiring manager, really look at kind of the skill sets you need. And I've talked a little bit about it with you guys before. So in terms of, do you have someone that can triangulate data, that can use some of the tools that are out there that, quite frankly, are beyond me? I ask some of the people that work for me to do that. So I think that looking at either data, technology basis, again, maybe looking at non-traditional, you know, sort of hiring, pulling in somebody from a business into compliance as a rotation. So thinking about ways to diversify, I think, the team so that you can anticipate more is maybe my advice.
Interesting. And data you feel is strong. Data you think is a big growing.
Data, tech, yeah, there's a couple of things. You need specialties, certainly. I mean, and maybe it's, you know, about looking at kind of the current skill sets along the compliance topics itself. You may find that you have a hole, but I think just where you source candidates, you know, think very openly about kind of how audit versus business versus risk versus compliance starts to go across.
And I would just, say compliance isn't going away. 3 to 6 months, interesting timeline right around bonus time and whether there will be bonus. But compliance folks should be energized by what's going on, and they should look at themselves and think about, do they have those tool sets that Irina and Nick have described? And if not, get those skill sets. It's not rocket science, even though we're talking about data. It's a mindset of wanting to be more nimble and capable. And the market is ripe for it because there are going to be more enforcement actions and there is going to be greater demand.
Interesting. Any last thoughts or any other topics or issues that maybe we didn't discuss that you felt, hey, I really want to get this out before we head out, or do you think we covered it a lot?
Change is good, right?
Change is good. That's, you know what? I guess that kind of captures it, right? Around it from the beginning of the conversation to now, you know, whether it's these Reddit day traders, whether it's, and we didn't talk about this. This could be another conversation too about, you know, the whole cryptocurrency, Bitcoin world. Right. There's a lot of changes. Yeah. And I think that's the watchword, right? That there's so much changes going on. And it seems, I don't know how you feel about it. It's going on much more quickly than it has in the past. And that, you know, you really need to stay abreast of what's happening. And that's why I enjoy doing these LinkedIn Lives, because it's giving out information. It's making people think. You know, we may or may not have all the right answers, but it just makes people start to take a step back and say, hey, maybe I should look into it. Maybe I should go back to school and get a certificate, at least maybe in data analytics, or learn Python or R or something like that, or get some basic technology skills so I'm not left behind. And because it's not, like Eric, as you pointed out too, it's not static. I mean, there's going to be a lot going on. And if you have M&A activity going on, I hate to say this, but then the downside for that, you got to worry, are you going to be the one with the job or not, depending on how that acquisition goes? And you want to have the tools, the experience,
absolutely,
everything you need to get another job. So
indispensable people never get laid off.
I'm sorry?
So make yourself indispensable. I'm saying the indispensable people never get laid off, right? Win a merger or whatever. So what can you do to make yourself indispensable and let other people recognize that, man, I can't go on this journey without this person.
That's a really, you know, good point. That's something that I speak a lot with career coaches, how to make someone like indispensable, because you're right. Because then they say, hey, we need Eric, we need Irina, we need Nick. I mean, if we got to choose, let Jack go, man. He sucks, but let's go. You know, but you guys, hey, we need you. You got, you know, sir, it's so true. It's so true. And that's actually something maybe we could kind of explore a little bit more in another one, because if you're that person in the office, they need you, you know, you know, no matter what's going on, you have to be there. And that goes also to the points of Eric too, and Irina, is that you get to be that indispensable person by learning, by studying, by having the talents, have the experience.
Any generation.
Yeah.
Any generation.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. I think, what do you think? I think this went really well for the first,
so fun.
For the first iteration. We covered a lot of ground. talked about a lot of things. And I think
good.
most importantly, I think we gave people a lot to think about and to consider and to get some ideas about, hey, what's going to happen? Because this is a good time. It's the beginning of a new year. People are starting to figure out, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing with my work? I don't know about you three, but I'll be honest, myself personally and people I speak to professionally and family and friends, this pandemic made us all think, what do we, do I want to keep doing what I'm doing? Do I want to do something different? Am I happy? So I think these kind of conversations are going to inspire people to say, hey, maybe I should kind of pivot to data analytics and technology because I'm in compliance and that's a hot area. Or maybe I have to do what Nick and Eric are saying. I got to make myself, I like my company, but I just got to make sure I have this job and I can excel my job and move forward internally. So I got to figure out how to make myself indispensable.
Right. Or other companies or better companies as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So great. Well, Nick, Eric, Irina, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chatting with you. And what we'll do is we'll kind of edit this up and then I'll shoot you a copy and we'll repost it. And hey, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of the WeCruiter podcast. If you want to check out other great content from WeCruiter, make sure to visit us at wecruiter.io. That's WECRUITR.io. We offer tons of great resources for job seekers and professionals, so make sure to check us out today.